Imagine this. You're a Soviet diplomat. In your pocket, two identical expensive pens. One photographs secret documents for the CIA. The other will kill you in 3 seconds. Every morning, Aleksandr Ogorodnik walked into the USSR Ministry of Foreign Affairs with both pens in his pocket. For 3 years, he lived knowing that one wrong choice, and he'd die right there in his office. But he kept photographing, page after page. Cables from Soviet ambassadors around the world, the Kremlin's strategic plans. Everything went to the White House. The U.S. president read these documents before the Soviet foreign minister did. It was the perfect operation. Until a translator at CIA headquarters started reading old intercepts from Bogota. His name was Karl Koecher. He was a Czechoslovak spy. 19 years he lived in America, penetrated the CIA, and started selling names. When the KGB came for Ogorodnik, he did the only thing he could, asked for his pen to write a confession. They gave him the pen. He bit the cap and died without saying a word. But the story didn't end there, because in Bogota, he left behind a pregnant lover. The pen clicks softly in the darkness. It is a sound that should mean nothing, metal against metal, spring against cartridge. But in this moment, in this room at the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the sound carries the weight of treason. The man's hands are steady as he positions the document under the lamp's narrow beam. His name is Aleksandr Dmitrievich Ogorodnik, though the Americans who own his soul know him only as TRIGON. The miniature camera concealed in the luxury fountain pen weighs less than 3 ounces, yet it holds the power to photograph state secrets at close range without flash, without sound beyond that gentle click. Outside his office window, Moscow sleeps under November snow. Inside, document after document passes beneath the lens. Each photograph is an act of rebellion, each frame a betrayal written in light and shadow. The T100 sub-miniature camera captures it all. Diplomatic cables, strategic assessments, the private communications of Soviet ambassadors from every corner of the globe. He has been doing this for 3 years. 3 years of living 2 lives. 3 years of knowing that discovery means death. But Aleksandr Ogorodnik is a man who has made his peace with the darkness. He has prepared for the inevitable. In his pocket, identical to the pen that now photographs Soviet secrets, rests another pen, this one hiding not a camera, but a capsule of cyanide. A gift from his American handlers, a final insurance policy. Tonight, he does not yet know that the walls are closing in, that somewhere across the ocean, a translator named Karl Koecher has already sold his name to Czech intelligence. He does not know that in 7 months, on the 22nd of June, 1977, he will bite down on that poison pen rather than betray the names of those who trusted him. For now, there is only the soft click of the shutter, the rustle of classified paper, and the slow, methodical work of documenting a superpower's secrets. Birth of a Traitor. November 11, 1939. Moscow gives birth to Aleksandr Dmitrievich Ogorodnik on a day when winter's first snow blankets the capital. He grows up in a Soviet Union that promises equality but delivers oppression, a system that speaks of the people's paradise while building walls to keep them trapped inside. The boy is bright, ambitious, drawn to languages and the wider world beyond Soviet borders. He attends the Institute of Foreign Affairs in Moscow, one of the elite training grounds for those who will represent the Soviet Union abroad. It is a place of privilege and surveillance, where students learn diplomacy alongside the unspoken understanding that the KGB watches everyone, trusts no one. By his early 30s, Ogorodnik has achieved what many Soviet citizens only dream of: a posting abroad. The year is 1973. The destination is Bogota, Colombia, where he will serve at the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs Embassy in Latin America. Colombia is a revelation. Here, thousands of miles from Moscow's watchful eyes, Aleksandr Ogorodnik tastes freedom for the first time. The warmth, the color, the chaos of South American life stands in stark contrast to the gray rigidity of Soviet existence. He walks streets where people speak freely, where newspapers criticize the government without fear, where the simple act of leaving the country does not require permission from state security. In Bogota, he meets Pilar Suárez Barcala, a Spanish woman whose presence in his life will change everything. She is beautiful, sophisticated, everything the Soviet system has taught him to distrust about Western women. They begin an affair. She becomes pregnant. These are the threads that the Central Intelligence Agency will pull to unravel his loyalty. The Colombian Administrative Department of Security notices the romance. They share their observations with their American counterparts. In the shadowy world of Cold War espionage, a Soviet diplomat with a pregnant mistress is a target of opportunity, a man with secrets to hide and reasons to cooperate. The approach comes in January 1974, in a location perfect for its privacy and vulnerability: a Turkish bath in downtown Bogota. Steam fills the air as Ogorodnik relaxes, wrapped only in a towel. A CIA officer slides closer, water dripping from his skin. The conversation begins casually, then turns pointed. The officer speaks of Ogorodnik's girlfriend, his unborn child, the precarious position of a Soviet diplomat carrying on an unauthorized relationship. But the pitch also offers something else: money, protection, and the possibility of eventual defection. According to declassified CIA accounts, Ogorodnik does not hesitate. He announces that he has never been a supporter of the Soviet system. He has always been, in his heart, a capitalist. He proposes an arrangement, and he proposes that it be lucrative. The making of TRIGON. The CIA gives him a cryptonym, TRIGON. It is a random selection from their database of code names, designed to reveal nothing about the agent's nationality or position. From this moment forward, Aleksandr Ogorodnik will live as two people: the loyal Soviet diplomat and the American spy with a geometric designation. His CIA handler in Bogota is a young officer who will later become infamous: Aldrich Ames, the man who will eventually betray dozens of American assets to the KGB for money. But in 1974, Ames is simply doing his job, and that job is to turn Ogorodnik into a functioning intelligence asset. The training begins immediately. For security reasons, it must be conducted in Bogota itself, despite the KGB presence in Colombia. The KGB maintains strong ties with local police, journalists, and government officials. Ogorodnik's Western lifestyle has already made him a high-profile personality within the diplomatic community. Soviet intelligence officers are monitoring him as part of their own recruitment campaign. The CIA selects a room at the Hilton Hotel in downtown Bogota for the training sessions. Over several weeks, George Sachs, a CIA technical operations officer who speaks fluent Russian, teaches Ogorodnik the fundamentals of espionage tradecraft. He learns secret writing using specially treated paper. He masters one-time pads for encoding messages. He practices identifying and utilizing dead drop sites, secret locations where materials can be exchanged without direct contact between agent and handler. Most importantly, he learns to use the camera. The CIA's Office of Technical Service has spent years developing a sub-miniature camera designated the T-100. It began as a response to the Penkovsky case, when the agency realized the desperate need for a camera that an asset could use to photograph documents while inside a KGB residentura. The technical requirements seemed nearly impossible. High-resolution images of full pages without distortion or flash, a film capacity of at least 100 frames, a completely silent shutter system, and small enough to conceal in an item a person would normally carry into secure facilities. The CIA partnered with one of America's most reputable pen manufacturers through a classified contract. The result is a luxury fountain pen, thick-bodied and expensive-looking, exactly the type of pen a successful Soviet diplomat would carry. It writes like its commercial namesake, but an imperceptibly shorter base for the nib and a smaller ink sac create a cavity that houses the tiny camera. Ogorodnik practices with it obsessively. The camera must be held steady, the document positioned precisely, the shutter released without the slightest tremor. In the hotel room, under Sachs's watchful eye, he photographs page after page of dummy documents until the motion becomes second nature. But Ogorodnik makes one additional request, a demand that horrifies his young handler. He insists on receiving a suicide pill. He will not return to Moscow, will not operate deep inside the Soviet Union without the means to end his own life if captured. The Americans understand. They have seen what the KGB does to captured spies. The interrogations in Lubyanka prison, the show trials, the executions. They provide him with a pen identical to the camera pen, this one containing an L pill, a lethal capsule of cyanide hidden in the cap. Ogorodnik examines it, tests the mechanism, then discards it. He demands another. The CIA complies, creating a second suicide pen with a more reliable release mechanism. This is the pen that Ogorodnik will carry back to Moscow, the pen that he will keep close for the next 3 years, the pen that he will eventually use as the KGB closes in. The Golden Harvest. In October 1974, Aleksandr Ogorodnik boards a flight from Bogota to Moscow. In his luggage, hidden among clothes and personal items, are the tools of his new trade: the camera pen, the suicide pen, invisible writing materials, one-time pads for encoding messages. In his mind rests the knowledge that he is now a spy operating in the most dangerous theater of the Cold War. Moscow Station, the CIA's operations center within the American embassy, receives news of his arrival with barely contained excitement. TRIGON is returning to the heart of the Soviet Union with training, motivation, and access. His new position at the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs places him in the Global Affairs Department. His desk processes diplomatic cables from Soviet embassies worldwide. Every day, classified documents cross his field of vision. Strategic assessments of American intentions, reports on Soviet influence operations in the Third World, frank analyses of Soviet diplomatic failures and successes. Every day, Ogorodnik selects the most valuable documents, waits until his office is empty, and photographs them with the pen camera. The quality is extraordinary. The T100 captures full pages with perfect clarity. No distortion at the edges, no telltale flash to alert nearby security. The miniature film cassettes hold dozens of exposures. When full, they are small enough to hide in a hollow coin or the heel of a shoe. The challenge is getting the film to his CIA handlers. Direct contact is impossible. The KGB maintains suffocating surveillance over all foreign nationals in Moscow, particularly American embassy personnel. Every American is assumed to be a CIA officer or potential recruitment target. Teams of KGB surveillance specialists follow them constantly, noting their movements, photographing their contacts. The solution is dead drops, a system of impersonal exchanges that allows TRIGON and his handlers to never meet face-to-face. Specific locations throughout Moscow are identified and memorized: a loose brick in a park wall, a hollow post on a railroad bridge, a fake piece of asphalt on a construction site. TRIGON will hide his film canisters in one location. Hours or days later, a CIA officer will retrieve them. In the same or a different location, the CIA will leave packages for TRIGON, fresh film, encrypted instructions, occasionally money or gifts. To signal readiness for an exchange, TRIGON uses chalk or colored marker to make small marks on designated objects, a red dot on a children crossing traffic sign, a vertical line on a utility pole. The marks mean, "I have material ready. I am not under surveillance. Proceed with the drop." The intelligence begins flowing to Washington in 1975. Document after document reveals Soviet foreign policy intentions at the highest levels. President Gerald Ford and his advisors read TRIGON's intelligence before meeting with Soviet ambassadors. They know the Kremlin's negotiating positions in advance. They understand Soviet calculations regarding Angola, Chile, Vietnam. For 2 years, TRIGON is one of the CIA's most valuable assets. Moscow Station codenames him with the digraph CK, which disguises his country of origin and moves the operation into a secure compartment on a strict need-to-know basis. As few people as possible are told about TRIGON. Every person who knows the secret is another potential security breach. But the operation requires one crucial element: a CIA officer willing to service the dead drops in Moscow. It is the most dangerous job in the agency, walking the streets of the enemy capital while KGB surveillance teams lurk in every shadow. The Widow's Mission. Martha Jane Denny is born on May 27, 1945, in Kansas City, Missouri. She grows up in Darien, Connecticut, graduates from Darien High School in 1963, and Drew University in 1967. In 1971, she marries John Peterson, a CIA paramilitary officer. They are stationed together in Pak Se, Laos during the Vietnam War. The Southeast Asian posting is Martha's introduction to the shadow world her husband inhabits. She sees the jungle airstrips, the unmarked aircraft, the men who arrive and depart on missions they cannot discuss. She learns to live with secrecy and danger. On October 19, 1972, John Peterson dies in a helicopter crash. Martha is 37 years old and newly widowed. She returns to the United States carrying grief and a fierce determination not to let her husband's sacrifice be meaningless. In July 1973, she joins the CIA. The agency in the early 1970s is a boys' club. Women work as secretaries, analysts, support staff. The idea that a woman could serve as an operations officer, recruiting foreign agents, running covert operations, is barely conceivable to the male establishment. They believe women will not be taken seriously by potential recruits. But Martha Peterson demands a real assignment, one equal to those given to men. She completes the operational training course, mastering surveillance detection, covert photography, dead drop protocols, and the subtle art of street tradecraft. She studies Russian with obsessive dedication. For 44 weeks, she immerses herself in the language until she can read Soviet newspapers and understand Moscow street argot. Her male colleagues are skeptical. The Moscow posting is considered the most challenging assignment in the agency, reserved for officers with years of field experience. Peterson has never worked overseas, except as a dependent spouse. But her instructors notice something the male officers miss. Peterson has an operational advantage precisely because she is a woman. The KGB in the mid-1970s operates under massive gender bias. Soviet intelligence assumes women lack the temperament and capability for covert operations. KGB surveillance teams focus their attention on male American embassy personnel. A woman, they believe, might work in a support role, but would never be trusted with actual intelligence operations. In November 1975, Martha Peterson arrives in Moscow. The cold hits her immediately as she steps off the plane, not just the physical cold of a Russian winter, but the oppressive atmosphere of a totalitarian state. Even at the airport, she can feel the eyes watching, the invisible presence of the surveillance apparatus. Her official cover is administrative clerk in the consular department of the American Embassy, handling visa and passport issues. It is boring, bureaucratic work, exactly what the KGB would expect a woman to be doing. Her covert role is known to only a handful of people. She is TRIGON's handler. She will service his dead drops. She will be the invisible link between the spy and his masters. Moscow Station briefs her in a secure room within the embassy. The chief of station, a career officer who took a risk by approving her assignment, explains the stakes. TRIGON is producing intelligence that goes directly to the president. The operation cannot be allowed to fail. Peterson studies maps of Moscow until she can navigate the city in her sleep. She memorizes dead drop locations, signal sites, escape routes. She learns the patterns of KGB surveillance, the cars that appear too frequently, the pedestrians who turn away too quickly, the subtle signs that she is being followed. Her first operational act comes in December 1975. The location is a park in central Moscow. The weather is brutally cold, temperatures well below freezing. Peterson spends hours before the actual drop conducting a surveillance detection route, a carefully planned series of movements designed to identify and evade any watchers. She takes multiple buses, enters shops through one door and exits through another, stops suddenly to tie a shoe while scanning the street behind her. When she is confident she is alone, she approaches the designated location, the base of a lamppost. She carries a hollowed-out log in her bag. Inside the log are one-time pads, fresh film for TRIGON's camera, and an envelope containing $200 in cash. She sets the log at the base of the lamppost, as if it had simply fallen there, and walks away. Her heart pounds as she disappears into the maze of apartment buildings nearby. An hour later, she returns to the spot. The log is gone. In its place, sitting in the snow, is a crushed milk carton. Smeared on top is what appears to be vomit, but is actually mustard plaster. TRIGON's signal that he has made the pickup successfully and that he has left materials for her. Peterson retrieves the carton. Inside is a canister of film. The operation has succeeded. The Invisible Woman. For 18 months, from November 1975 to July 1977, Martha Peterson walks the streets of Moscow like a ghost. The KGB surveillance teams assigned to watch American embassy personnel categorize her as low priority. She is female, she works in the consular section, she exhibits no suspicious behavior during her official duties. The male case officers draw the watchers' attention. They are tailed constantly, their every movement logged and reported. But Peterson moves through the city with relative freedom. Her gender, in this one context, is her superpower. She services dead drops every few weeks. The locations vary: a railroad bridge over the Moscow River, a construction site near Lenin Central Stadium, the hollowed-out base of a monument in a forgotten park. She develops a routine, though the routine itself must constantly evolve to avoid detection. After work, she changes clothes in a bathroom at the embassy. She removes all jewelry that might identify her as American. She keeps only her Seiko watch, a gold-plated automatic she purchased at the PX at Ubon Air Base in Thailand when she and her late husband were stationed in Laos. The watch is Japanese, not American, and could belong to any woman in Moscow. She leaves the embassy through a side entrance, aware that KGB teams are positioned at all the exits. But they are looking for male officers engaging in suspicious behavior. A woman leaving to go shopping or meet friends barely registers. Her surveillance detection routes take her across Moscow. She rides buses and metro trains, walks through department stores, stops at food shops. The city becomes her operational terrain. She learns its rhythms, its blind spots, the places where a person can disappear into the crowd. On the nights of actual drops, she carries specialized equipment. Hidden beneath her clothing is an SRR-100, an electronic monitoring device that detects radio transmissions. KGB surveillance teams use radios to coordinate their movements. If the SRR-100 picks up nearby transmissions, Peterson knows she is being watched. She also carries the packages for TRIGON. The contents vary depending on his needs: fresh film, one-time pads, invisible writing materials, occasionally jewelry or money as payment for his services. In one package, she includes a sophisticated piece of equipment requested by Moscow Station, a modified shortwave radio receiver that TRIGON can use to receive encoded messages from CIA broadcasts. The technology allows the agency to communicate with him without dead drops, though TRIGON still prefers the personal connection of the exchanges. The film canisters she retrieves from TRIGON are rushed to Moscow Station. CIA technical officers develop the film in a darkroom within the embassy. The images are extraordinary. Page after page of Soviet diplomatic correspondence captured with perfect clarity. The documents are photographed again, this time on standard film, and sent to CIA headquarters in Langley via diplomatic pouch. Within 48 hours of TRIGON photographing a document in his Moscow office, analysts at Langley are reading its contents. The intelligence informs American negotiating strategies in arms control talks, reveals Soviet intentions in regional conflicts, exposes divisions within the Soviet leadership. TRIGON's production is so valuable that some of his intelligence goes directly to President Jimmy Carter's daily briefing. The President of the United States reads words photographed by a Soviet diplomat using a pen camera built by the CIA. Peterson and TRIGON never meet. She knows him only through his work, the precision of his photography, the selection of documents he chooses to share, the small notes he sometimes includes in the dead drops. "Thank you for the emerald bracelet," one note says. "My companion appreciated the gift." She knows he has a woman in his life, that he dreams of defecting to the West, that he fears discovery. In her apartment, alone at night, Peterson sometimes thinks about the man whose life depends on her competence. She imagines him in his office, surrounded by colleagues who would denounce him in an instant if they knew his secret. She thinks about the courage it takes to photograph those documents, knowing that a single mistake means death. When she packages materials for a dead drop, she keeps them under her coat until the moment of placement, warming them with her body heat. "It was my warmth that I was giving to him," she will later write. It is the only human contact they share, the residual heat from her body transferred to the package, then to his hands. For 18 months, the operation runs smoothly. Moscow Station congratulates itself on the success. Peterson has proven that a woman can operate effectively in the most hostile environment in the world. TRIGON continues to produce gold, but across the ocean, in the translation offices of CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, a man named Karl Koecher is reading transcripts from TRIGON's early days in Bogota. And Karl Koecher is not what he appears to be. The Mole. Karel František Koecher is born on September 21, 1934 in Bratislava, Czechoslovakia. His father is Viennese Czech, his mother a Slovak Jew. Growing up in a household that survives both Nazi occupation and Soviet liberation, young Karel learns early that survival depends on adaptation, on showing the authorities whatever face they wish to see. He attends an English grammar school, then a French lyceum. By adolescence, he speaks 4 languages fluently. His teachers note his analytical capabilities, his high intelligence, his individualistic nature. They also note something else. He is not well liked. His character is off-putting. In later years, former classmates will refuse to invite him to reunion meetings. When the Communists seize power in Czechoslovakia in 1948, Koecher's anti-state activities attract the attention of state security. Rather than face ongoing harassment, he makes a calculated decision. He joins the Communist Party in 1960, then the Czechoslovak Intelligence Service, the STB, in 1962. In 1963, he marries Hanna Pardymykova, daughter of a Communist Party official. She is beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed, a decade younger than her husband. She joins the intelligence service alongside him. Together, they will form one of the most successful spy teams of the Cold War. The STB trains them for a special mission: deep cover penetration of American intelligence. For 2 years, from 1963 to 1965, they undergo intensive training in Prague. They learn American customs, practice their cover stories, master the techniques of clandestine communication. They are taught to beat polygraph tests, to maintain their cover under interrogation, to live as dissidents while serving the communist regime. In 1965, Karl and Hanna Koecher begin their journey to America. They travel through Austria, posing as anti-communist refugees fleeing persecution. Karl claims to be a comedy writer from Czech radio who can no longer work under the oppressive regime. Their defection story is carefully crafted to appeal to Western intelligence services. American immigration officials, unable to verify information from behind the Iron Curtain, accept the Koecher's story at face value. By the time they land on American shores, their past in Czechoslovakia has effectively been erased. Background checks can only go back to the day they arrived. The CIA has no way to knock on doors in Prague to verify their claims. Karl Koecher leverages his language skills and refugee status to gain employment at Radio Free Europe, the CIA-backed broadcasting service. He obtains a fellowship at Indiana University. In 1967, he returns to New York and pursues a doctorate in philosophy at Columbia University. In 1971, he becomes an American citizen. Hanna follows a year later. With American citizenship in hand, Karl Koecher submits his application to the CIA. On February 5, 1973, he walks into CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, as a contract translator. He has a top-secret security clearance and an annual salary of $10,000. He is assigned to a program known by the cryptonym AE Screen, working with other émigré translators in the Soviet and Eastern Europe division. His job is to translate covertly acquired Czech and Russian language tapes and documents. Koecher quickly complains that simple translation work does not utilize his skills. He has a doctorate from Colombia, he reminds his supervisors. They listen. They ask him to begin writing assessments on the individuals mentioned in the conversations he translates. He becomes an analyst, as well as a translator, his clearance level and access expanding accordingly. By 1975, he is translating telephone intercepts from Soviet embassies in Latin America. One set of intercepts comes from Bogotá, Colombia. They relate to a Soviet diplomat who has come to the attention of American intelligence. Karl Koecher reads the transcripts with great interest. The diplomat's profile is clear: married man with access to classified materials, stationed in Bogotá, involved in an unauthorized relationship. Later reassigned to Moscow with even greater access. The pieces fit together with damning precision. Koecher knows exactly what he is reading. The CIA has recruited a high-level asset in the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Through his Czech intelligence handlers, he passes this analysis to the KGB. The information is fragmentary but sufficient. Through triangulation, examining which Soviet diplomats served in Bogotá during the relevant time frame and were subsequently reassigned to Moscow, KGB counterintelligence narrows the suspects. One name rises to the top: Aleksandr Dmitrievich Ogorodnik. The KGB does not move immediately. Instead, they begin surveillance, looking for confirmation, watching for the operational mistakes that always come eventually. Meanwhile, Karl and Hanna Koecher live the American dream. They purchase a luxury cooperative apartment in Manhattan. Hanna works in the diamond trade at Harry Winston Jewelers, a position that allows her to travel frequently to Europe as a courier for Czech intelligence. Karl's KGB case officer, Colonel Alexander Sokolov, describes him as a super spy. But the Koechers have another hobby that raises eyebrows even in the sexually liberated 1970s. They are enthusiastic participants in the Washington, D.C. and New York swinger scene. They frequent establishments like Plato's Retreat and the Hellfire Club. They join Capital Couples, a swingers network in Washington that meets at the Exchange restaurant, just 2 blocks from the White House. Their parties attract a fascinating crowd: CIA employees, FBI agents, senior Department of Defense officials, even a U.S. senator, according to later accounts. Karl and Hanna Koecher are experts at sexpionage, using sexual encounters to gather information and build relationships with people who have security clearances. Hanna was most attractive, really, a beautiful, blue-eyed, blonde Czechoslovakian intelligence officer. A former CIA officer will later recall. She was part of a team. She and her husband came as a unit, worked as a unit, and left as a unit. For years, the Koechers operate with impunity. They pass secret information to Czech intelligence, which shares it with the KGB. They attend sex parties with American intelligence officers. They live openly in Manhattan, protected by the CIA's failure to conduct adequate background investigations on émigré translators. And in Moscow, the information they have provided about TRIGON slowly, methodically, leads the KGB toward its target. The walls close in. The first sign that something is wrong comes in January 1977. A CIA officer skis through fresh snow to a dead drop site in a forest on the outskirts of Moscow. The location has been used successfully several times before. The officer searches carefully, aware that fresh snowfall might have concealed the cache. Nothing. The package left for TRIGON, fresh film and communication equipment, has not been retrieved. Moscow Station experiences a moment of anxiety. Snow has deterred the agent, the optimists suggest. The weather was too severe. He will make the pickup next time. But concern grows when a February exchange also fails. A hollowed log filled with requested communication gear is left at another location. Days pass. The log remains untouched. Moscow Station debates its options. Has TRIGON been arrested? Is he under surveillance? Has he simply become too frightened to continue? Then, in April 1977, the tension breaks. TRIGON leaves a cache at a scheduled location. The package contains several film canisters. Moscow Station celebrates the renewed contact. But when the film is developed, something is wrong. The technical officers who have examined every previous roll of TRIGON's photography notice immediately. The quality is different. The technique is sloppy. Documents are photographed at awkward angles, some images partially out of focus. Every spy has his own signature, his own pattern of work, and this does not match TRIGON's meticulous standards. A disturbing possibility emerges. The KGB has arrested TRIGON and is now running him under control, feeding the CIA disinformation while using the dead drops to identify American case officers. Some Moscow Station officers want to shut down the operation immediately. Others argue for giving TRIGON one more chance. Perhaps he is working under stress. Perhaps he rushed the photography to avoid detection. The debate is resolved by sending a coded message via shortwave radio. If TRIGON is still operational and not under KGB control, he should send a specific signal. A red dot placed on a children crossing traffic sign near a Moscow school. The sign is visible from a street that CIA officers frequently travel. Days pass. Then, in late May, a CIA officer drives past the sign and sees it. A small red dot, exactly where TRIGON promised to place it. Relief floods through Moscow Station. TRIGON is operational. Whatever problems occurred in February, he has resolved them. A dead drop is scheduled for June 28, 1977. TRIGON will leave his latest film. A CIA officer will retrieve it and leave a new package. But June 28th comes and goes. TRIGON never appears. The dead drop remains empty. Moscow Station sends another radio message, scheduling a new exchange for 2 weeks later. The date is set, July 15, 1977. The location is Krasnoluski Most, a railroad bridge near Lenin Central Stadium that spans the Moscow River. A pedestrian walkway runs along the side of the tracks. The spot has been used before. It offers good visibility for surveillance detection, but provides sufficient cover for the actual dead drop exchange. Martha Peterson is assigned to service the drop. She has been handling TRIGON successfully for 18 months. She knows his patterns, his signals, his tradecraft. If anyone can make contact safely, it is her. On the afternoon of July 15th, Peterson goes through her standard preparation. She changes clothes, removing anything that identifies her as American. She straps the SRR-100 electronic detection device beneath her clothing, secured by Velcro under her bra. The package she will leave for TRIGON is prepared carefully. Money, emerald jewelry, and a new T100 camera to replace his aging equipment. She conceals the package under her coat, warming it with her body heat. She begins her surveillance detection route in mid-afternoon. For hours, she moves through Moscow, using every technique she has learned. Multiple buses, random stops, sudden changes of direction. She watches reflections in shop windows, memorizes the faces of people who appear more than once. The SRR-100 remains silent. No radio transmissions, no signs of KGB surveillance teams. As evening approaches and shadows lengthen across the Moscow River, she makes her final approach to Krasnoluski Most. The bridge is quiet. She climbs the stairs to the pedestrian walkway, her footsteps echoing on the metal grating. At the designated spot, a tower support on the bridge, she places the package disguised as a piece of black asphalt. It looks like road repair material, something no one would think to examine. She completes the placement and begins descending the stairs. 3 men appear at the bottom of the stairs. They run toward her. Peterson realizes immediately what is happening. She is in an ambush. She shouts, "Provocation!" at the top of her lungs, a warning in case TRIGON is nearby. She fights them physically. She is a trained CIA officer, and she does not go quietly. She kicks and strikes out, landing a traumatic blow to one captor's face. But there are too many. A van pulls up. The doors fling open, revealing 10 to 20 more men inside. The KGB has brought an entire surveillance team for this arrest. They grab her, tear open her blouse, expose the SRR-100 strapped to her body. They seize her bag, finding the equipment, the notes, the evidence of espionage. Martha Peterson is driven to Lubyanka prison, the fortress of gray stone in central Moscow that houses the KGB's headquarters and interrogation cells. For hours she is questioned in a barren room under harsh lights. KGB interrogators demand she confess to espionage. They show her the equipment they found, spread out on a table like exhibits in a trial. And then, one interrogator takes out a black pen, the suicide pen that was meant for TRIGON. He places it far away from the other items, treating it with visible caution. "Nobody touch," he warns in Russian. In that moment, Peterson knows. The KGB has TRIGON. He is either arrested or dead. The pen could only have come from him. The interrogation continues, but Peterson's mind is elsewhere, calculating what TRIGON's capture means, wondering if he used the poison, or if he is now in a cell somewhere in this building, being tortured for information. At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning on July 16th, the KGB calls the American embassy. The consular chief, a man named Cliff, who has no idea that Peterson is a CIA officer, arrives and confirms her diplomatic status. The KGB is forced to release her. She has diplomatic immunity. But they make clear that she is persona non grata. She must leave the Soviet Union immediately. Peterson returns to the embassy for a brief debriefing with Moscow Station. She tells them everything: the ambush, the equipment, the suicide pen. The conclusion is inescapable. TRIGON has been compromised. The extent of the damage is unknown. By early morning, Peterson boards the first flight out of Moscow. KGB officers follow her to the airport, watching as she departs. Years later, she will write, "They had respect for me. I had fooled them." But the victory is hollow. TRIGON is gone. The pen is mightier. June 22, 1977. The day Martha Peterson's ambush is still 3 weeks in the future. The day that has been approaching since Karl Koecher first whispered TRIGON's name to Czech intelligence. Aleksandr Ogorodnik is in his apartment in Moscow. The knock on the door comes in mid-afternoon. He opens it to find several men in dark suits. They show identification: KGB. He is asked to accompany them. The words are polite, but refusal is not an option. At KGB headquarters, he is taken to an interrogation room. The questioning begins immediately. The officers are not subtle. They know he is a spy. They have evidence. They want a confession. According to KGB accounts that the CIA will not learn for years, Ogorodnik remains calm. He does not break down or plead. Instead, he makes a practical suggestion. He will provide a full written confession of his espionage activities. He will write down everything. All he needs is time and something to write with. The interrogators agree. This is exactly what they want: a signed confession that can be used in a trial, broadcast in the Soviet media as proof of CIA criminality. One of the officers hands Ogorodnik paper and a pen. Not just any pen. Ogorodnik's own pen, the luxury fountain pen that the KGB has not yet recognized as anything more than a writing instrument. Ogorodnik accepts the pen. He uncaps it as if preparing to write. The interrogators watch, expecting him to begin detailing his treason. Instead, in one swift motion, Aleksandr Dmitrievich Ogorodnik bites down on the pen barrel. The cyanide capsule hidden in the cap is crushed between his teeth. The poison acts within seconds. L-pills, lethal pills, are designed for rapid effect. The cyanide disrupts cellular respiration, causing immediate catastrophic failure of the body's systems. Ogorodnik collapses. According to witnesses, he is dead before his body hits the floor of the interrogation room. The KGB officers stare in shock. They had not suspected the pen. They had been so focused on obtaining his confession that they handed him the very weapon he needed. Aleksandr Ogorodnik dies his own way, on his own terms. He dies without speaking a word that could endanger others. He dies knowing that he has beaten his interrogators, that the KGB will get no confession, no show trial, no propaganda victory. In his final act, the spy called TRIGON refuses to betray those who trusted him. The cyanide erases his voice, but preserves his honor. He is 37 years old. He dies without knowing that he has a daughter. Pilar Suarez Barcala, his lover in Bogota, gave birth to Alejandra Suarez Barcala. The child will grow up never knowing her father, learning his story only years later when the Cold War ends and secrets begin to spill. He dies without knowing that the woman who handled his dead drops, who warmed his packages with her body heat, who never met him but thought of him constantly, will spend the next 7 years believing his capture was her fault. He dies knowing only that he chose freedom over submission, death over dishonor. The KGB removes his body. They conduct an internal investigation to determine how thoroughly he compromised Soviet diplomatic communications. They discover that he failed to destroy used pages from his one-time pad, a security breach that reveals additional details about his mission and his CIA handlers. But there will be no public announcement of his death. The Soviet Union does not acknowledge when it executes spies. Ogorodnik simply disappears from the records, another ghost in a system that specializes in making people vanish. Years later, in 1984, the Soviet Union will broadcast a television series called TASS is Authorized to Declare. It is a sophisticated spy thriller written by Yulian Semyonov based on information provided by KGB chairman Yuri Andropov. The series features a high-ranking CIA spy inside the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs who commits suicide during interrogation by biting down on a poison pen. The story is fiction, but everyone who watches recognizes the truth hidden within it. This is how the Soviet public learns what happened to Aleksandr Ogorodnik. Not through official acknowledgement, but through dramatization, through a television show that serves as both entertainment and warning. This is what happens to traitors. This is how their stories end. The aftermath. Martha Peterson does not learn TRIGON's fate immediately. In the chaotic hours after her arrest and expulsion from Moscow, she knows only that the operation has been compromised, that TRIGON has likely been captured, that her 18 months of work have ended in disaster. She returns to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, devastated. For 7 years, she will believe that she made a mistake, that she led the KGB to TRIGON, that his blood is on her hands. The agency tries to reassure her. They review her operational tradecraft. They find no errors, no moments where she exposed herself to surveillance, no breaches in security that would explain the ambush. But Peterson cannot shake the guilt. TRIGON trusted her with his life, and now he is gone. She continues her career with the CIA. She remarries in 1978, wedding Joseph Shogi. She takes on new assignments, spends 10 more years working overseas in various capacities. She earns the Donovan Award and the George W. Bush Award for Excellence in Counterterrorism. But TRIGON's fate haunts her. Then, on November 27, 1984, 7 years after her arrest in Moscow, FBI agents move in on an apartment in Manhattan. The target is Karl Koecher, age 50, and his wife Hannah, age 40. The couple has just sold their luxury cooperative apartment for more than $250,000. They have purchased 2 tickets to Zurich, Switzerland. They are hours away from leaving the country permanently. FBI agents arrest them at 4:15 p.m. outside the Barbizon Plaza Hotel as they prepare to head to Kennedy International Airport. Karl Koecher is charged with providing classified national security information to the Czechoslovakian Intelligence Service, a capital offense carrying a sentence of up to life imprisonment. The arrest generates headlines across America. A Czech-born CIA employee, having infiltrated the spy agency as a double agent, has funneled the identities of American spies to Czechoslovakia for at least 3 years. U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani leads the prosecution. He announces at a press conference that virtually every piece of information that came into his possession was turned over to Czechoslovakian intelligence. During FBI interrogation, Koecher provides a detailed confession. He admits joining Czech intelligence in 1963, entering the United States in 1965 as a sleeper agent, penetrating the CIA in 1973, and serving as an illegal officer for 19 years. He describes specific instances of espionage, including photocopying classified documents and passing them to Czech couriers through dead drops and brush passes. He confirms that he translated telephone intercepts and documents linked to high-value CIA penetrations. One name surfaces in the interrogation: Aleksandr Ogorodnik, codenamed TRIGON. The CIA finally has confirmation. TRIGON was betrayed not by Martha Peterson's operational mistakes, but by Karl Koecher's systematic compromise of CIA operations. Koecher had access to telephone intercepts from Bogotá during TRIGON's initial recruitment. By analyzing the patterns, a Soviet diplomat with access to classified materials stationed in Bogotá, later reassigned to Moscow, he provided enough information for the KGB to identify their traitor. Peterson receives the news in 1984. The weight of 7 years of guilt lifts. TRIGON's capture was not her fault. She did everything correctly. The betrayal came from inside the CIA itself, from a mole who had been operating undetected for more than a decade. The legal case against the Koechers becomes complicated. Karl's confession was obtained after FBI agents promised him immunity as an interrogation tactic. The confession is ruled invalid. Hanna, held as a material witness, is denied access to a lawyer despite repeated requests. Prosecutors cannot build a solid case. The evidence is circumstantial. Both Koechers refuse to cooperate further. On February 11, 1985, after months of legal wrangling, the United States and Czechoslovakia arrange a prisoner exchange. Karl and Hanna Koecher are traded for Soviet dissident Anatoly Sharansky and 3 others. They cross the Glinica Bridge connecting West Berlin and Potsdam, walking from American custody into communist hands. In Prague, they receive a hero's welcome. The Czech government provides them with a new Volvo, an apartment, and prestigious positions. Karl is given a job at the Czech Academy of Science. They are celebrated as patriots who served their country in the heart of the enemy empire. Years later, after the fall of communism, journalist Ronald Kessler will interview the Koechers for his book, The Bureau: The Secret History of the FBI. The interview lasts 5 days. When asked about Ogorodnik's death, Karl Koecher expresses regret. "I'm deeply sorry about that," he tells Kessler. "But the people who did him in were the CIA and he himself. They recruited him in such a clumsy manner." It is the closest thing to an apology TRIGON will ever receive. The price of secrets. The damage assessment begins immediately after the Koechers' arrest. CIA counterintelligence officers review every operation that Karl Koecher had access to during his 3 years as a translator and analyst. TRIGON is not the only victim. Koecher compromised CIA recruitment efforts throughout Latin America. He warned the KGB about targeted individuals, enabling countermeasures that disrupted agent networks. He provided intelligence on KGB operations that the CIA was monitoring. He sabotaged counterintelligence assessments. The scope of the betrayal is staggering. The CIA conducts internal investigations into its hiring and vetting procedures. How did a Czechoslovak intelligence officer manage to obtain a top-secret clearance? How did he work for 3 years in one of the most sensitive divisions without triggering any security concerns? The answer is uncomfortable. The agency relied too heavily on the defector narrative. Émigrés from Eastern Europe were assumed to be anti-communist refugees grateful for American protection. Background checks were superficial, because investigators could not access information behind the Iron Curtain. The CIA had created a vulnerability, and Karl Koecher exploited it perfectly. Security procedures are overhauled. Émigré translators face additional scrutiny. Polygraph tests become more frequent and more sophisticated. The CIA institutes stricter compartmentalization of information, ensuring that translators can access only the specific materials relevant to their immediate assignments. But these reforms come too late for TRIGON and the other assets Karl Koecher betrayed. In Moscow, the KGB conducts its own assessment of the TRIGON case. Internal reports emphasize that Ogorodnik was recruited through promises of financial reward, ultimately receiving approximately $315,000 for transmitting classified documents. Soviet propaganda portrays him as morally corrupt, a traitor motivated by greed and personal decadence rather than principled opposition to the regime. The narrative serves the state's purposes. It discourages other potential defectors by characterizing espionage as venal and self-serving, rather than ideologically motivated. But those who knew Ogorodnik tell a different story. He was a man who experienced freedom in Colombia and could not return to Soviet oppression without rebellion. He was a father who wanted to protect his daughter, even though he would never meet her. He was a spy who chose death over betrayal. The KGB buries him quietly. His family is told he died of natural causes. His name is scrubbed from official records. For years, the truth of his life and death remains classified, hidden in KGB archives that will not open until the Soviet Union itself collapses. Martha Peterson completes her 30-year CIA career in 2003. She retires with commendations, awards, and the respect of her colleagues. She is recognized as a pioneer, one of the first women to serve as a case officer in a hostile operating environment, proof that gender is no barrier to excellence in intelligence work. In 2012, she publishes her memoir, The Widow Spy: My CIA Journey from the Jungles of Laos to Prison in Moscow. The manuscript is submitted to the CIA for review, a standard requirement for former officers. The agency approves its publication. For the first time, Peterson tells her story in her own words: her husband's death in Laos, her determination to carry on his legacy, her 18 months in Moscow as TRIGON's handler, her arrest at Krasnoludsky Most, and her 7 years of believing she had failed. The book reveals what she could never say before. TRIGON died his own way, a hero. In interviews, she is asked repeatedly about TRIGON. She describes warming his packages under her coat, the only human contact they ever shared. She talks about never meeting him, but feeling connected to him through their shared mission. She explains how his death haunted her for years until she learned the truth about Karl Koecher. "We just knew that we were picking up gold off the street," she says, describing the intelligence TRIGON provided. Each roll of film contained secrets that shaped American policy at the highest levels. Presidents read his reports. Secretaries of State adjusted negotiating positions based on his photographs. The Cold War was fought with weapons and soldiers, but also with information and betrayal. TRIGON's story becomes part of the public record through multiple channels. CNN produces a documentary series called Declassified, featuring Peterson's account. The International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. creates exhibits about the operation. The KGB Museum in Moscow displays artifacts from the case, including the equipment seized from Peterson during her arrest. Peterson's story appears in academic journals, intelligence histories, and documentary programs. She becomes a regular speaker at intelligence conferences and museum events. In 2024, at age 79, she is still giving talks at bookstores, sharing her experiences with new generations. The Soviet television series TASS is authorized to declare, which fictionalized TRIGON's story, is studied by historians as an example of how the KGB used popular culture to shape public perception of espionage cases. The show's author, Yulian Semyonov, based his script on information provided by KGB chairman Yuri Andropov himself, a subtle way of revealing operational details without official acknowledgement. Years after the Cold War ends, former KGB officers give interviews about the TRIGON case. They confirm the basic facts. Ogorodnik was arrested. He committed suicide during interrogation. He used a CIA-supplied poison pen. But they offer different interpretations of his motivations, his character, his worth as a human being. The propaganda battle continues decades after the spy's death. The daughter, Pilar Suarez Barcala, lives in Bogotá during Aleksandr Ogorodnik's posting there from approximately 1972 to 1974. She is Spanish, beautiful, part of the expatriate community that mingles with diplomats and foreign service officers. Her affair with the married Soviet diplomat is passionate, but doomed from the start. Soviet regulations strictly forbid unauthorized relationships with foreign nationals. When Pilar becomes pregnant, Ogorodnik faces an impossible situation. He cannot acknowledge the child without destroying his career and inviting KGB investigation. He cannot defect without abandoning his espionage mission. He cannot even tell Pilar the truth about what he is doing. According to CIA accounts, Pilar assists in Ogorodnik's recruitment. Whether she knows she is helping the CIA or believes she is simply facilitating her lover's defection is unclear from available records. What is clear is that she becomes pregnant during the time of Ogorodnik's initial contact with American intelligence. In 1974, Ogorodnik returns to Moscow. Pilar remains in Bogotá. Shortly afterward, she gives birth to a daughter, Alejandra Suarez Barcala. Aleksandr Ogorodnik never meets his child. He dies on June 22, 1977, when Alejandra is approximately 3 years old. He dies without knowing she exists. The information about his daughter does not surface in CIA files until years later, long after the operation has ended. Pilar raises Alejandra alone. As the girl grows up, she presumably knows only that her father was a Soviet diplomat, that he returned to Moscow, that he is gone. The full story, that he was a spy who photographed state secrets with a pen camera, who died by cyanide rather than betray his handlers, who was one of the CIA's most valuable Cold War assets, remains hidden for decades. Only after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, when archives begin opening and secrets start spilling into public view, does the truth about Aleksandr Ogorodnik become available. Only then can his daughter learn who her father really was. Whether Alejandra Suarez Barcala has chosen to embrace her father's story or distance herself from it is not documented in publicly available sources. The CIA does not publicize information about the families of its assets. The emotional and psychological impact of learning that one's father was a spy who chose death over capture is impossible to quantify. But the fact remains, Aleksandr Ogorodnik left behind a daughter who carries his genetic legacy, if not his name or his secrets. The escrow account the CIA established for Pilar and the child, part of Ogorodnik's compensation for his espionage, presumably provided some financial support. But money cannot replace a father. Money cannot explain why he disappeared. Money cannot prepare a child for the moment when she learns that her father's death was international news, documented in KGB files and CIA reports, dramatized in Soviet television shows. In some ways, Alejandra is the ultimate victim of the TRIGON operation. Her father chose to spy against his country. He chose to risk his life for money and ideology. He chose to photograph secrets rather than raise his daughter. These choices led directly to his death. And Alejandra, who made none of these choices, must live with their consequences. The Cold War created millions of such stories. Children who grew up without parents, families torn apart by ideology, lives destroyed by the great game of espionage. Alejandra Suárez Barcala represents all of them, the innocent casualties of a conflict fought in shadows, where loyalty was currency and betrayal was rewarded with death. The legacy of fear. The TRIGON operation transforms how the CIA conducts espionage in Moscow. The lessons learned from Ogorodnik's success and Martha Peterson's near-miraculous string of 18 undetected dead-drop operations influence agency tradecraft for decades. The use of female case officers in environments where the adversary underestimates women becomes standard practice. The CIA recognizes that gender bias in foreign intelligence services can be exploited as an operational advantage. More women are recruited, trained, and deployed to hostile environments. Peterson's success opens doors that had been closed to female officers. The operation also highlights the critical importance of technical services. The T-100 subminiature camera, the suicide pen, the electronic detection devices, the sophisticated dead-drop concealment, all demonstrate that successful espionage requires not just courage, but technology. The CIA's Office of Technical Service expands its budget and capabilities, developing ever more sophisticated tools for agents operating in denied areas. But TRIGON's betrayal by Karl Koecher forces uncomfortable reckonings. The CIA must acknowledge that its vetting procedures were inadequate, that émigré translators represented a massive security vulnerability, that the agency's eagerness to employ native speakers of Soviet languages created opportunities for foreign intelligence services to penetrate American operations. The reforms that follow are comprehensive, but cannot undo the damage already done. The psychological impact on CIA officers who worked on Soviet operations is profound. If a translator in Langley could betray agents in Moscow, who else might be compromised? How many other operations have been sabotaged by moles the agency hasn't yet discovered? The paranoia that characterizes the final decades of the Cold War is partly a response to cases like TRIGON, the growing realization that the intelligence services have been penetrated at multiple levels. That trust is a luxury that gets people killed. In Moscow, the KGB uses the TRIGON case to justify increased repression. The fact that a Soviet diplomat spied for America confirms their worldview that Western intelligence constantly works to subvert and destroy the Soviet Union. Security procedures at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs become even more stringent. Diplomats face loyalty checks, enhanced surveillance, restrictions on their movements abroad. The operation also changes how the KGB approaches counterintelligence. The success of Martha Peterson's surveillance detection routes demonstrates that even in Moscow, with its vast network of watchers and informants, a skilled CIA officer can operate undetected. The KGB responds by expanding surveillance capabilities, recruiting more agents, developing better technical means of tracking foreign intelligence officers. The cat-and-mouse game escalates. For the broader intelligence community, TRIGON becomes a case study. His recruitment, his productivity, his protection through dead drops and impersonal communications, his eventual compromise, his suicide rather than confession. All of these elements are analyzed, written about in classified internal reports, taught to new generations of intelligence officers. The message is complex. Even the most successful operations can end in tragedy. Even the most careful tradecraft can be defeated by a mole. Even the bravest agents sometimes choose death over capture. The operation influences popular culture. The Soviet television series based on the TRIGON case becomes one of the most watched programs in USSR history. Its portrayal of CIA espionage techniques, while propagandistic, contains enough truth to fascinate viewers. In the West, TRIGON's story appears in books about Cold War espionage, documentary programs, museum exhibits. The pen camera and suicide pen become iconic symbols of the spy game's lethal stakes. Intelligence historians debate TRIGON's motivations. Was he genuinely opposed to the Soviet system, as he claimed to his CIA handlers? Or was he primarily motivated by money, as Soviet propaganda insisted? Did he understand that his affair with Pilar Suarez Barcala made him vulnerable to recruitment? Or was he genuinely surprised by the CIA's approach in the Turkish bath? The truth, as is often the case with espionage, remains elusive. People are complex. Motivations are rarely pure. Aleksandr Ogorodnik was probably both an ideological opponent of the Soviet system and a man who enjoyed the financial rewards of espionage. He was both a brave spy who chose death over betrayal and a father who abandoned his pregnant lover. He was both a hero to the CIA and a traitor to his country. The contradictions do not cancel each other out. They coexist, making him more human, not less. The $315,000 he received from the CIA represents substantial compensation, but it also financed his daughter's support and his eventual defection plans. The suicide pen he requested and eventually used demonstrates both his paranoia and his realism. He knew exactly what would happen if the KGB arrested him. The cold calculus of espionage reduces human beings to assets and sources, to cryptonyms and operational security. But behind every code name is a person who made choices, who lived with fear, who risked everything for reasons that seemed sufficient at the time. TRIGON reminds us of that humanity, even as his story illustrates the inhuman machinery of Cold War intelligence operations. The surveillance state. To understand the TRIGON operation, one must understand the environment in which it unfolded. Moscow in the mid-1970s is a city under constant observation. The KGB's second chief directorate, responsible for counterintelligence against foreign intelligence services, maintains one of the most comprehensive surveillance operations in history. Every American at the U.S. Embassy is assumed to be either a CIA officer or a recruitment target. Surveillance teams follow them from the moment they leave the embassy compound. The teams are large, professional, equipped with radio communications and vehicle support. They work in shifts to maintain 24-hour coverage. The watchers memorize the faces, patterns, and habits of their targets. They photograph contacts, note unusual behavior, report any deviation from established routines. The KGB plants listening devices throughout Moscow. The embassy itself is thoroughly bugged. In 1952, during the embassy's construction, Soviet workers installed listening devices in the building's very walls. American efforts to debug the embassy are partially successful, but the KGB's technical capabilities constantly evolve. Secure rooms exist within the embassy where classified conversations can occur, but outside those rooms, the assumption is that everything is monitored. Soviet citizens who interact with Americans face immediate investigation. A casual conversation with a foreigner can result in KGB questioning. Romantic relationships are strictly controlled. Any Soviet citizen who begins a relationship with an American is assumed to be either recruiting the American or being recruited by them. The punishment for unauthorized contact ranges from job loss to imprisonment. In this environment, dead drops become essential. Direct meetings between CIA officers and Soviet assets are simply too dangerous. The moment a Soviet citizen is observed in conversation with a known or suspected American intelligence officer, that Soviet citizen becomes a counterintelligence target. Their apartment is searched. Their communications are monitored. Their colleagues are questioned. Their family members face pressure. The only way to protect an asset is to eliminate any visible connection between the asset and their handlers. Dead drops achieve this separation. The asset leaves materials at location A. Hours or days later, a CIA officer retrieves them from location A and leaves new materials at location B. The asset picks up from location B at a different time. If the KGB observes the CIA officer servicing the drop, they still have no way to identify the asset. And if surveillance is sophisticated enough to watch both the placement and retrieval, the agent can simply not approach. The dead drop remains cold, unactivated. Signal sites add another layer of security. Instead of risking a dead drop when surveillance might be present, the asset first checks a prearranged location. If a specific mark appears, a piece of chalk on a wall, a colored pin on a bulletin board, a magnetic marker on a traffic sign, it means the dead drop is ready to be serviced. If no mark appears, the asset knows to stay away. Martha Peterson's successful operation of 18 months without detection is extraordinary precisely because the odds are so heavily stacked against her. She is operating in the most hostile environment in the world, against the most comprehensive surveillance apparatus ever created, with the knowledge that a single mistake means not just her own arrest, but TRIGON's death. And she succeeds. The key factors in her success are multiple. First, her gender. The KGB surveillance teams in 1975 simply do not believe that a woman can be a serious intelligence officer. They watch the male case officers intensively while paying less attention to female embassy staff. Second, her training. The surveillance detection routes she uses are sophisticated, unpredictable, designed to identify watchers. She varies her patterns constantly, never becoming predictable. Third, her discipline. She never relaxes her guard, never assumes she is safe, never takes shortcuts that might expose the operation. Every dead drop is approached with the same meticulous preparation. Fourth, the technology. The SRR-100 electronic detection device gives her advance warning if KGB surveillance teams are using radios nearby. The sophisticated concealment devices, fake asphalt, hollow logs, dead rats, are designed to look like urban debris, not intelligence materials. Fifth, TRIGON's own tradecraft. He uses the signal sites correctly. He varies his pickup times. He does not deviate from the established protocols. The operation succeeds because both agent and handler are professionals who understand the stakes. But no operation can survive a mole. Karl Koecher's betrayal demonstrates that even perfect tradecraft cannot protect against compromise from within. The CIA's internal security is the weakest link, and the KGB exploits it ruthlessly. The technology of betrayal. The T100 camera is a marvel of miniaturization. Development begins in early 1970 in response to lessons learned from the Oleg Penkovsky case. Penkovsky, a Soviet military intelligence officer who spied for the CIA and British intelligence from 1960 to 1962, struggled with the bulky cameras provided by his handlers. The equipment was difficult to conceal and required time to set up. When Penkovsky was arrested and executed, intelligence services on both sides of the Iron Curtain studied the case to identify operational weaknesses. The CIA concluded that assets operating inside secure Soviet facilities needed better equipment. Quentin Johnson, during his assignment to the Technical Services Division, pressed for development of a camera that could be used to photograph documents while inside a KGB residentura, an intelligence station. The requirements seemed nearly impossible. The camera had to capture high-resolution images of full pages without distortion at the edges. It had to function without flash, since any bright light would immediately alert security. It had to hold at least 100 frames of film, since retrieving exposed film and delivering fresh film through dead drops was risky and time-consuming. The shutter had to be completely silent. Even a soft click might attract attention in a quiet office. And the entire device had to be small enough to conceal in an item a person would normally carry into guarded facilities. Engineers at the CIA's Office of Technical Service worked for years to meet these specifications. The breakthrough came with advances in miniaturized optics and film technology. By using specially formulated high-speed film and precision-ground lenses, they achieved the necessary resolution without requiring flash illumination. The shutter mechanism was redesigned multiple times to eliminate all sound. The Film Advance system used a clever clutch and sprocket design, though early versions proved fragile and unreliable. The production model T100 measured approximately 2 inches long and less than an inch in diameter, small enough to conceal in a luxury fountain pen. Film capacity was reduced from the original goal of 100 frames to approximately 50 frames per cassette, a compromise necessitated by reliability concerns. But 50 high-quality photographs of classified documents still represented extraordinary intelligence value. An internationally recognized luxury pen manufacturer, working under classified contract with the CIA, reproduced one of its premium models specifically for TRIGON. The pen had to look and function exactly like its commercial counterpart. The ink reservoir was reduced in size to create the concealment cavity, and the nib base was made imperceptibly shorter. When assembled, the pen was virtually indistinguishable from the genuine article, even under close examination. Only disassembly would reveal the camera hidden inside. TRIGON received training in the pen camera's use during his preparation in Bogota. The operation required practice. Documents had to be positioned flat under good lighting. The pen had to be held steady at the correct distance. The shutter had to be released without jarring the camera. A blurred image was a wasted frame, and film was a precious resource delivered only through dangerous dead-drop operations. He mastered the technique. Over 3 years of operation, TRIGON photographed thousands of pages of classified Soviet diplomatic correspondence. The quality was consistently excellent. CIA photo interpreters could read even small typewritten text in the developed images. Each frame contained intelligence that informed American policy decisions at the highest levels. The suicide pen used similar concealment technology. Instead of a camera, the hollowed cavity contained an L-pill, a capsule of cyanide designed for rapid effect. The capsule was positioned in the pen's cap, protected by a thin membrane. To activate it, the user bit down on the cap, crushing the membrane and releasing the poison directly into the mouth. Death followed within seconds. The CIA developed L-pills during World War II for operatives working behind enemy lines. The logic was grimly practical. Some operatives, if captured, would face torture that could force them to reveal information endangering others. A quick death was preferable to prolonged interrogation. The pills were strictly voluntary. No one was required to carry them, but many operatives requested them as a psychological comfort, a final insurance policy against the worst possible outcome. Ogorodnik requested his L-pill before returning to Moscow in 1974. He tested the first pen the CIA provided, found the mechanism insufficiently reliable, and demanded a replacement. The CIA complied, creating a second suicide pen with an improved design. This was the pen he carried for 3 years. This was the pen he used on June 22, 1977. The interrogators who watched him die were stunned. They had searched him for weapons. They had examined his possessions. But they had not suspected the pen, an ordinary writing instrument that turned out to be TRIGON's final statement of autonomy. Other technology supported the operation. One-time pads allowed encrypted communication in written messages. The pads consisted of sheets covered with random numbers. Both sender and receiver had identical pads. To encrypt a message, the sender would convert letters to numbers using a simple substitution cipher, then add the numbers from the pad. The result looked like random garbage. Only someone with the identical pad could decrypt the message by subtracting the pad numbers. Each sheet was used once and destroyed, making the encryption theoretically unbreakable. TRIGON also received a modified shortwave radio receiver concealed in a common household item. The CIA broadcast encrypted messages at specific times on specific frequencies. TRIGON could tune in from his Moscow apartment and receive instructions without any physical dead drop. The broadcasts were brief, using groups of numbers that corresponded to his one-time pad. To any casual listener, the broadcasts sounded like random number sequences, number stations that operated throughout the Cold War, mysterious voices reading endless digits that meant nothing to anyone except the intended recipients. The SRR-100 electronic receiver that Martha Peterson wore during her final operation represented another technical achievement. The device detected radio frequency transmissions in the ranges typically used by KGB surveillance teams. When multiple watchers coordinated their movements, they communicated by radio. The SRR-100 gave Peterson advance warning that surveillance was active nearby, allowing her to abort operations before walking into an ambush. On July 15, 1977, the device remained silent during Peterson's approach to Krasnoludski Most. But the KGB had learned to anticipate this countermeasure. The ambush team maintained radio silence, communicating instead through hand signals and pre-positioned observers. When Peterson descended the stairs after placing the dead drop, the trap had already closed. No electronic countermeasure could save her from a well-planned KGB operation supported by intelligence from Karl Koecher about TRIGON's compromise. The mathematics of betrayal. The numbers tell part of the story. $315,000 in 1970s currency, approximately $1.5 million in 2025 terms, paid to Aleksandr Ogorodnik for his espionage services. 3 years of active operation from early 1974 to June 1977. 18 months of successful dead drop operations by Martha Peterson in Moscow without detection. Thousands of pages of classified Soviet diplomatic correspondence photographed and delivered to the CIA. 50 frames per film cassette. Dozens of dead drop exchanges. One mole, Karl Koecher, who compromised it all. 19 years that Karl and Hanna Koecher operated as deep cover agents in the United States. 3 years that Karl Koecher worked inside CIA headquarters with top secret clearance. $10,000 annual salary for Koecher as a CIA translator in 1973. $250,000 received when the Koechers sold their Manhattan apartment hours before their arrest. 4:15 p.m. on November 27, 1984, the time of their arrest. 2 of them, Karl and Hanna, operating as a team. 7 years that Martha Peterson believed she had failed TRIGON before learning the truth about Koecher. 30 years of Martha Peterson's CIA career before retirement in 2003. 79 years old in 2024 when she is still giving talks about the operation. One daughter, Alejandra Suarez Barcala, who never met her father. June 22, 1977, the date of Ogorodnik's death. July 15, 1977, the date of Peterson's arrest. 23 days between the two events, seconds between the moment Ogorodnik bit down on the poison pen and his death. 4 hours of interrogation that Martha Peterson endured at Lubyanka prison. 2 a.m. when the KGB finally released her. 10 to 20 KGB officers in the van that took her to Lubyanka. 3 men who initially grabbed her on Krasnoluski Most. 1 traumatic blow she landed on a captor's face before being overwhelmed. 0 meetings between Martha Peterson and Aleksandr Ogorodnik, despite 18 months of operational partnership. 0 words spoken by Ogorodnik to his interrogators before his suicide. 0 confessions signed. 0 show trials. 0 propaganda victories for the KGB, despite capturing one of the CIA's most valuable assets. These numbers cannot capture the human reality of the operation, but they define its parameters. $315,000 bought the CIA access to the innermost workings of Soviet foreign policy. 3 years of TRIGON's photography informed American negotiating strategies during some of the Cold War's most critical moments. 1 betrayal by Karl Koecher unraveled it all. But the mathematics of espionage are never simple. For every number that can be quantified, dollars spent, documents photographed, years of operation, there are immeasurable factors. The courage it took for Ogorodnik to photograph classified documents while surrounded by KGB-loyal colleagues. The fear he lived with daily, knowing that discovery meant death. The determination Martha Peterson needed to walk Moscow streets night after night, serving dead drops while KGB surveillance teams hunted for American intelligence officers. The intelligence value cannot be precisely calculated. How many American diplomatic strategies succeeded because TRIGON revealed Soviet positions in advance? How many international negotiations favored the United States because American officials knew what the Kremlin really wanted? How many Cold War crises were diffused or managed more effectively because of TRIGON's intelligence? These questions have no quantifiable answers, but the cumulative impact was significant enough that multiple U.S. presidents read his reports. The cost in human terms is equally incalculable. 1 man dead by his own hand at age 37. 1 woman carrying 7 years of undeserved guilt. 1 daughter growing up without her father. Dozens or hundreds of CIA operations potentially compromised by Karl Koecher's betrayal. Untold numbers of Soviet citizens who became more vulnerable to KGB repression as security measures tightened in response to TRIGON's espionage. But perhaps the most significant number is the simplest. 1 man, Aleksandr Dmitrievich Ogorodnik, born November 11, 1939, died June 22, 1977, who decided that freedom was worth dying for, that principle mattered more than survival, that some secrets should be kept even at the cost of one's own life. 1 person can change history. 1 betrayal can undo years of work. 1 suicide can deny the enemy its victory. The mathematics of espionage always come back to that irreducible unit, the individual human being making choices in the dark with incomplete information, knowing that the consequences may be fatal. TRIGON made his choices. Karl Koecher made his. Martha Peterson made hers. Each set of choices led to different outcomes, but all of them shaped the course of the Cold War in ways that reverberate decades later. November 27, 2025. 48 years after Aleksandr Ogorodnik's death. 41 years after Karl Koecher's arrest. 22 years after Martha Peterson's retirement. The Cold War is long over. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, dissolving into 15 independent nations. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989. The ideological struggle that consumed the second half of the 20th century has been replaced by new conflicts, new fears, new threats. But the story of TRIGON endures because it captures something fundamental about the human condition under totalitarianism. Aleksandr Ogorodnik could not live freely in the Soviet system, so he found a way to fight it from within. He chose betrayal of his government as an act of loyalty to his own conscience. That choice cost him everything, but it was his choice to make. Martha Peterson continues to speak about her experiences at age 79. She has become a symbol of women's contributions to intelligence work, proof that gender is no barrier to operational excellence. The KGB underestimated her because she was female, and that underestimation allowed her to operate successfully in the most hostile environment in the world. Her story inspires new generations of intelligence officers, particularly women who face skepticism from male colleagues who believe espionage is a man's profession. Karl and Hanna Koecher live in relative obscurity in the Czech Republic. After the fall of communism, their status as heroes of the intelligence services became complicated. The regime they served no longer exists. The ideology they supposedly believed in has been discredited. They are relics of a different era, neither celebrated nor condemned, simply irrelevant. In interviews given years after the Cold War ended, Karl Koecher expresses no remorse for his espionage. He insists he served his country honorably. When asked about the men and women whose operations he compromised, the agents who died because of information he provided to Czech and Soviet intelligence, he deflects responsibility. They were clumsy, he suggests. The CIA recruited them badly. The fault lies with their handlers, not with him. It is the amoral logic of the professional spy. Everyone is playing the same game, and those who lose have only themselves to blame. The daughter, Alejandra Suarez Barcala, remains a private person. She has not given public interviews about her father's espionage and death. Her life was shaped by events she had no part in, decisions made before she was old enough to understand them. She carries her father's genetic legacy and her mother's surname, but the question of what she carries emotionally is hers alone to answer. The International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. maintains exhibits about Operation TRIGON. Visitors can see photographs of the pen camera, examples of dead-drop concealment devices, images of Martha Peterson's equipment seized by the KGB. The exhibits draw crowds. People are fascinated by the tradecraft, the technology, the real-world application of techniques they've seen dramatized in spy films and novels. But the museum exhibits, for all their historical accuracy, cannot fully convey what it felt like to live these events. They cannot capture the fear Ogorodnik experienced every time he photographed a classified document, knowing that a colleague walking into his office unexpectedly would mean his death. They cannot replicate the tension Peterson felt walking through Moscow at night, hyper-aware of every person on the street, every car that seemed to appear too frequently, every moment that could be her last as a free woman. They cannot make visitors understand what it means to bite down on a pen cap filled with cyanide, to choose death over dishonor, to die in a windowless interrogation room while KGB officers watch in shock. Some stories can only be told, not experienced. Some history can only be remembered, not relived. The TRIGON operation is one of these stories, a document of a particular moment in the Cold War, when one man's courage and one woman's skill combined to give the United States a window into Soviet decision-making, until a mole's betrayal shattered the operation and sent Aleksandr Ogorodnik into the darkness that claimed so many Cold War spies. In the end, what remains is memory and documentation. CIA files released decades later, Martha Peterson's memoir published in 2012, academic studies of Cold War intelligence operations, museum exhibits, and documentary programs. The dry facts that can be verified cross-checked, cited. Dates of birth and death, names and code names, the documented movements of agents and handlers. And beneath all the documentation, the human reality, fear and courage, betrayal and loyalty, the choices people made when they could not know how their stories would end. Aleksandr Dmitrievich Ogorodnik, codenamed TRIGON, chose to fight the Soviet system from within its bureaucracy. He photographed its secrets with a pen camera. He accepted payment from a foreign intelligence service. He requested and received a suicide pill. When the KGB finally caught him, he used that pill to deny them his confession, his testimony, his submission. He died his own way. Martha Peterson chose to serve her country after her husband's death. She demanded real assignments equal to those given to men. She walked the dark streets of Moscow servicing dead drops for an asset she never met. When the KGB ambushed her, she fought them physically before being overwhelmed. She endured interrogation without breaking. She carried undeserved guilt for 7 years until the truth about Karl Koecher's betrayal finally freed her. Karl Koecher chose to infiltrate American intelligence services in support of Czech and Soviet espionage objectives. He penetrated the CIA's translation section. He identified CIA assets and operations. He passed classified information to foreign intelligence services for 19 years. When finally caught, he confessed, but later recanted. He expressed no remorse. He lives in Prague, an old man now, survivor of a game where most players ended up dead or broken. 3 people, 3 sets of choices, 3 different fates. The spy who chose death over capture. The handler who chose excellence over acceptance. The mole who chose betrayal over loyalty. Their decisions, made in the shadows of the Cold War, created ripples that extend into our present. We study them not because they were unique, but because they were representative. Examples of the thousands of intelligence operations conducted during the decades-long struggle between superpowers. We remember them because their stories were eventually told, dragged into the light through declassification and memoir and historical investigation. But for every story we know, dozens remain classified. For every name we remember, hundreds are forgotten. The Cold War was fought by legions of spies and handlers and analysts whose work will never be publicly acknowledged, whose contributions to history will never be documented beyond sealed files in locked archives. TRIGON's story survived because Martha Peterson chose to tell it, because the CIA approved her memoir for publication, because journalists and historians found the documents and pieced together the narrative, because Karl Koecher's arrest confirmed the betrayal, because enough time has passed that national security concerns no longer justify complete secrecy. In this way, the dead spy lives on, not in the flesh that dissolved decades ago, but in the record of his choices, in the lessons his operation teaches, in the recognition that even in totalitarian systems, individuals retain agency. Aleksandr Ogorodnik could not prevent the Soviet Union from existing. He could not single-handedly end the Cold War. He could not save himself from the KGB's suspicions. But he could photograph documents. He could choose which secrets to share. And when they finally caught him, he could deny them the satisfaction of his confession. It was a small power in the face of overwhelming state authority, but it was his power, and he exercised it to the end. The pen clicked softly in the darkness. The shutter captured state secrets. The poison ended a life on its owner's terms, and somewhere in the archives, the documents remain. Evidence that one man tried to make a difference, that one woman risked everything to support him, that the human spirit resists subjugation even in the most hostile environments. This is the story of TRIGON. This is what happened. These are the facts, as best they can be reconstructed from CIA files and KGB documents, from memoirs and interviews and historical investigations. Every date is documented. Every name is real. Every event occurred. The horror is not supernatural. The horror is history.